At dawn on May 5, 1945, approximately 150 Waffen-SS soldiers emerged from the forest surrounding Castle Itter in the Austrian Alps. They carried machine guns. They had an 88mm flak gun positioned on high ground overlooking the castle. They were fanatical, they were prepared to die, and they were attacking a castle defended by American soldiers, Wehrmacht troops, French politicians, and an SS captain who had defected from the Nazi regime. The strangest alliance of World War II was about to fight the strangest battle of the war. Inside the castle, Captain John C. Lee, Jr. of the 23rd Tank Battalion, 12th Armored Division, positioned his men at defensive points. His Sherman tank, Besotten Jenny, blocked the main gate. 14 American soldiers occupied firing positions. 10 Wehrmacht soldiers under Major Josef Gangl held the east wall. Former SS Captain Kurt Siegfried Schrader coordinated the French prisoners who had armed themselves with rifles from the abandoned armory. Former French Prime Ministers Édouard Daladier and Paul Reynaud took positions with weapons. Tennis champion Jean Barotra loaded magazines. General Maurice Gamelin, commander of French forces in 1940, stood ready to fight. The defenders numbered approximately 40. The attackers numbered 4 times that. But the defenders had walls, they had a tank, and they had something the SS attackers did not. They had unity of purpose. Former enemies fighting together to protect lives from fanatics who would murder everyone if they breached the walls. This was one of the last battle fought by the Wehrmacht. One of the very few documented occasions where American and German troops fought together against the SS. This was May 5, 1945, 3 days before Germany's unconditional surrender. 5 days after Hitler's suicide, the war was ending, but the dying continued. The story begins with a castle. Schloss Itter stands on a hilltop overlooking the village of Itter in North Tyrol, Austria. The foundations date to the 13th century. The current structure was rebuilt in 1878. It became a hotel in the early 20th century. In 1940, after the Anschluss incorporated Austria into Nazi Germany, the castle was leased by the German government. In February 1943, SS Obergruppenführer Oswald Pohl seized the castle under orders from Heinrich Himmler. On April 25, 1943, Castle Itter became a prison camp administered by Dachau concentration camp. The prisoners were not Jews or political dissidents. They were French VIPs, high-value prisoners with potential use as hostages or bargaining chips. Former Prime Minister Édouard Daladier had signed the Munich Agreement in 1938 and declared war on Germany in 1939. Former Prime Minister Paul Reynaud had refused armistice in June 1940 and was arrested when the Vichy government took power. General Maurice Gamelin, commander-in-chief of French forces in 1940, until he was dismissed after the German breakthrough. General Maxime Weygand replaced Gamelin as commander. Former Minister of the Interior Georges Mandel. Former Aviation Minister Michel Clemenceau, son of Georges Clemenceau, the World War I leader. Marie-Agnès Caillot, older sister of Charles de Gaulle. Tennis champion Jean Barotra, who had won Wimbledon twice and the French Open once before the war. Others, 14 French prisoners by May 1945. Plus, Eastern European prisoners from Dachau who performed maintenance work at the castle. The prisoners lived under guard, but conditions were relatively comfortable. Adequate food, private rooms, books. The SS wanted them healthy in case they were needed for negotiations. The commandant was SS Hauptsturmführer Sebastian Wimmer. He maintained order without brutality. The guards were older men, not frontline troops. Life at Castle Itter was imprisonment, but not death camp conditions. The prisoners understood they were valuable alive. That value kept them safe as long as Nazi Germany existed. When Nazi Germany collapsed, their value would become liability. The SS might execute them to prevent Allied use of them, or the SS might try to move them deeper into Alpine redoubt areas as bargaining chips. Either way, liberation meant danger. By late April 1945, the situation was collapsing. Soviet forces approached from the east. American forces approached from the west. Hitler committed suicide on April 30th. The Dachau main camp was liberated on April 29th. Word reached Castle Itter. The guards became nervous. On May 2nd, the former Dachau commandant, Eduard Weiter, who had been staying at the castle, died under suspicious circumstances. Possibly suicide, possibly murdered by prisoners. The circumstances remain unclear. On May 3rd, Commandant Wimmer fled. He feared the prisoners would kill him when liberation came. The SS guards left shortly after. The prisoners took control of the castle. They armed themselves with weapons the guards left behind. Rifles, submachine guns, ammunition. But they were not soldiers. They were politicians and an athlete. They understood weapons but lacked military training. More critically, they were trapped. SS units still operated in the area. The 17th Waffen SS Panzergrenadier Division was nearby. These troops were fanatics. They executed deserters. They shot anyone displaying white flags. They killed military-age males suspected of avoiding service. If the French prisoners tried to flee and encountered an SS patrol, they would be murdered. The prisoners needed help. On May 3rd, Zvonimir Chuchkovich volunteered to seek Allied forces. Chuchkovich was a Yugoslav communist resistance member who had been imprisoned at Dachau and transferred to Castle Itter as maintenance worker. He left the castle on a bicycle claiming an errand. He rode toward Innsbruck, 64 kilometers distant. Late that evening, he reached American positions, the 103rd Infantry Division. He explained the situation. The division organized a rescue force, heavily armored, multiple vehicles. The force departed at dawn May 4th but encountered German artillery fire near Jenbach, halfway to Itter. The force was recalled. Command decided the operation was too risky for territory that would be secured within days anyway. But Chuchkovich had reached help. 2 jeeps with auxiliary personnel continued toward Itter. The main rescue had been canceled, but word had spread. The prisoners waited. When Chuchkovich did not return by afternoon May 4th, the prisoners sent another messenger, Andreas Krobot, the Czech cook. He cycled to Worgel, 8 kilometers down the mountain. Worgel had been abandoned by Wehrmacht forces but reoccupied by roaming Waffen-SS troops. Krobot contacted Austrian resistance fighters in the town. They took him to Major Joseph Gangl. Joseph Gangl was 41 years old, career Wehrmacht officer since 1935. He had served on the Eastern Front and Western Front. He had been decorated multiple times. By May 1945, he commanded remnants of a unit that had defied orders to retreat. Instead of fleeing, Gangl joined Austrian resistance led by Rupert Hagleitner. He used his position to protect Worgel civilians from SS reprisals. He hoped American forces would arrive quickly so he could surrender. He had no intention of dying in the war's final days for a regime he no longer believed in. When Krobot explained the situation at Castle Itter, Gangl understood the danger. The French VIPs were valuable targets. The SS would want to execute them, but Gangl had only 10 to 20 loyal soldiers, not enough to defend the castle against a determined SS attack. He needed American help. At approximately the same time, a reconnaissance unit of 4 Sherman tanks from the 23rd Tank Battalion had reached Kufstein, 13 kilometers north of Worgel. The commander was Captain John C. Lee, Jr. Lee was 37 years old, from Norwich, New York, commissioned from Officer Candidate School. He had commanded tank units through France and Germany. He was unconventional. He drank. He smoked cigars constantly. He ignored regulations when they interfered with accomplishing missions. His superiors tolerated him because he was effective. His men followed him because he got results and brought them home alive. Gangl drove toward Kufstein under a white flag. He found Lee's unit. Through an interpreter, he explained the situation. French VIPs trapped at Castle Itter. SS preparing to attack. Wehrmacht, soldiers willing to help defend. Would the Americans assist? Lee contacted his headquarters. Permission granted. He would take his tank and a small force, drive to Itter, assess the situation, defend if necessary until reinforcements arrived. Lee selected 14 men. Tank crew for Basat and Jenny. Infantry to provide security. On afternoon May 4th, the mixed American-German force departed for Castle Itter. Lee, Gangl, and another German soldier drove ahead in a scout car to reconnoiter. They reached the castle at approximately 1600 hours. The French prisoners greeted them enthusiastically. Then they saw the size of the rescue force. 1 tank, 14 Americans, 10 Germans. This was the rescue. The prisoners had hoped for a battalion. They received a platoon. Lee assessed the defenses. The castle was medieval construction with 19th century modifications. Stone walls, gatehouse, central courtyard, multiple floors, defensive positions on the walls, a keep that could serve as final fallback. The approach was open ground. Attackers would be exposed, crossing that ground. The castle could be defended with limited forces if defenders used the walls effectively. Lee decided to stay. Attempting to evacuate the prisoners at night through SS-controlled territory was more dangerous than defending the castle until reinforcements arrived. He positioned his tank blocking the main gate. He placed his men at key positions. Gangel's Wehrmacht soldiers took the east wall. Former SS Captain Schrader coordinated the French prisoners. Schrader's presence requires explanation. Kurt Siegfried Schrader had been a decorated Waffen-SS officer. He served as bodyguard at Hitler's headquarters. He was severely wounded in France in 1944. During his convalescence at Itter, he befriended the French prisoners. Conversations with them, particularly with intellectuals like Michel Clemenceau, caused Schrader to question Nazi ideology. He defected, joined the Austrian resistance. When the prisoners took control of the castle, they asked Schrader to lead their defense. He agreed. He brought his family to the castle for protection. The former SS captain would command French politicians in defense against his former comrades. The defenders settled in for the night. Lee established radio contact with headquarters. He requested reinforcements. He was told forces would arrive May 5th. Until then, he was on his own. The night passed with minor probing attacks. SS reconnaissance units tested the defenses. Machine gun fire was exchanged. No serious assault developed. At dawn May 5th, the main attack began. Obergruppenführer Georg Bochmann commanded the SS force. Approximately 150 Waffen-SS from the 17th Panzer Grenadier Division, experienced troops. Fanatics! They had fought across Europe. They knew assault tactics. They had heavy weapons, machine guns, Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons. An 88mm flak gun positioned on high ground 1,200 meters from the castle. The 88 was deadly, originally designed as anti-aircraft weapon. It was equally effective against ground targets. It could penetrate tank armor at that range. It could reduce stone walls to rubble. Besotten Jenny was vulnerable. The SS opened fire at approximately 0700 hours. The 88 fired high explosive shells at the castle walls. Machine guns raked the battlements. The defenders returned fire. The Americans used their tank's 75mm gun and 2 machine guns. The Wehrmacht soldiers fired rifles and a machine gun. The French prisoners fired rifles and submachine guns. The volume of defensive fire was impressive considering the numbers, but ammunition was limited. Every burst had to count. Wasted ammunition meant death when the supplies ran out. The battle developed into siege warfare. The SS could not approach the castle across open ground under fire from the walls and the tank. They attempted to suppress defensive fire with heavy weapons while infiltrating closer. The defenders had to prevent SS troops from reaching the walls while conserving ammunition. It was stalemate, but stalemate favored the attackers. They had unlimited ammunition. The defenders did not. Eventually, defensive fire would slacken. Then the SS could advance. At approximately 800 hours, an 88 shell struck Besotten Jenny. The impact damaged the transmission. The tank could not move, but the guns still functioned. The crew continued firing from the immobilized position. The tank's machine guns swept the approach repeatedly. SS attempts to advance were stopped by converging fire, but the tank was now static target. Additional 88 shells hit the Sherman. At approximately 1,000 hours, a direct hit penetrated the armor. The crew bailed out. 3 wounded. All survived. The tank burned. Without the tank, defensive firepower was reduced significantly. The French prisoners moved forward to occupy positions the tank had covered. Former politicians fired rifles at SS troops who had fought across Europe. The incongruity was total. Ammunition ran low. Lee ordered rationing. Single shots only. No automatic fire unless targets were masked. Gangel used his military telephone to contact Austrian resistance in Wargl. He requested reinforcements urgently. The resistance could send only 3 men, 2 Wehrmacht soldiers and an Austrian teenager. They arrived at approximately 10:30 hours. Marginal increase in combat power, but every rifle mattered. At approximately 1100 hours, an SS sniper positioned in the forest shot Major Gangel. He died protecting Paul Reynaud. Gangel had seen the sniper aiming at the former French Prime Minister. He pushed Reynaud aside and took the bullet himself, killed by a German sniper while fighting alongside Americans to protect French prisoners from Germans. The contradictions of May 1945 crystallized in one death. The defenders were being overwhelmed. Ammunition nearly exhausted. Tank destroyed. Commander killed. The SS was closing on the walls. Lee began withdrawing defenders into the keep for final stand. Then Jean Barotra acted. The tennis champion had an idea. He was athletic. He could run fast. He would vault the castle wall, sprint through SS lines, reach American forces nearby, and bring reinforcements. Lee considered the plan insane. Borotra insisted. Lee agreed. Nothing else was working. At approximately 1130 hours, Borotra vaulted over the wall. He ran. SS troops fired at him. Bullets kicked up dirt around him. He ran faster. He reached the tree line. He disappeared. The SS could not pursue because defensive fire from the castle pinned them down. Borotra ran 4 kilometers to the village of Itter. He found elements of the 142nd Infantry Regiment from the 36th Infantry Division. He explained the situation breathlessly. The regimental commander immediately dispatched reinforcements. Tanks, infantry, artillery support. At approximately 1400 hours, American forces arrived at Castle Itter. Sherman tanks, half-tracks, infantry in overwhelming numbers. The SS assault collapsed. Some SS troops fled into the forest. Others were surrounded and captured. Approximately 100 SS prisoners were taken. The battle ended. The siege was lifted. The French VIPs were safe. The casualties: Joseph Gangel dead, 4 defenders wounded. SS casualties unknown but estimated at 20 to 30 killed and wounded. A small battle by World War II standards, but unique in every way. The aftermath was quiet. The French prisoners were evacuated to American custody. They were debriefed. They returned to France. Most resumed political careers. Daladier served in the National Assembly until 1958. Reynaud remained in politics until 1962. Weygand lived until 1965. They were lionized as survivors of Nazi imprisonment. Their role fighting at Castle Itter was downplayed. Politicians are not supposed to be soldiers, but they had fought. They had taken up arms. They had defended themselves and each other. That mattered, even if it was forgotten in the official narratives. Captain Lee was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions at Castle Itter. The citation noted his extraordinary heroism. He commanded joint American-German forces against determined enemy attack. He held the castle until reinforcements arrived. He protected high-value prisoners from SS murder. After the war, Lee left the army. He died in 1973. His widow donated his papers to Norwich University, where they are archived. Major Gangel was recognized posthumously. A street in Vorgel was named Josef Gangel-Strasse. A memorial plaque was placed at the site where he was killed. He is remembered as a Wehrmacht officer who refused to follow illegal orders and chose to protect civilians and prisoners rather than support a criminal regime. His example is complicated. He served the Wehrmacht through most of the war. He participated in the Nazi war machine. In the final days, he chose differently. That choice cost him his life. The French prisoners remained grateful. After the war, several returned to Itter. They placed a memorial plaque at the castle gate. The plaque honors the defenders. It mentions Joseph Gangel specifically. It acknowledges the mixed force that fought together. The plaque remains today. The Battle of Castle Itter is largely forgotten. It appears in specialty military histories. Stephen Harding wrote The Last Battle in 2013. Bringing renewed attention, the Swedish metal band Sabaton recorded a song titled The Last Battle about the engagement. Otherwise, it remains obscure, not taught in schools, not prominent in World War II documentaries. A footnote, a curiosity, the strangest battle of the war. But the battle matters. It demonstrates that even at the end, choices were possible. Wehrmacht soldiers could defect. SS officers could question ideology. Americans could trust former enemies. French prisoners could fight. Alliances could form based on immediate necessity rather than long-term strategy. The war created categories: Allied, Axis, Enemy, Friend. Castle Itter showed those categories were fluid when survival was at stake. The moral calculations are complex. Major Gangel served the Wehrmacht for 10 years. He participated in operations that enabled Nazi crimes. In the final week of the war, he chose to protect prisoners rather than follow orders. Does that choice redeem his prior service? Does defending 14 French prisoners balance years of enabling genocide? These questions have no simple answers. Gangel made a choice when choice was still possible. He died making that choice. That is the fact. Whether it redeems or merely complicates his record is for each person to decide. Captain Lee trusted Gangel. This was pragmatic. Lee needed help defending the castle. Gangel offered help. Lee accepted. But it was also moral. Lee recognized that Gangel was acting honorably in that moment. Past service was irrelevant to the immediate situation. Gangel was protecting prisoners from murder. Lee assisted. The alliance worked because both men focused on the immediate mission rather than ideological purity. The French prisoners fought alongside their liberators and their former guards. This violated every expectation about how prisoners should behave. They were politicians. They should have hidden in the keep while soldiers fought. They were prisoners. They should have been passive victims awaiting rescue. Instead, they armed themselves and fought. Daladier and Renaud and Gamelin and Weygand had failed to defend France in 1940. 5 years later, they defended a castle in Austria successfully. The symbolism is uncomfortable but undeniable. The SS attackers were criminals. The 17th Waffen, SS Panzer Grenadier Division, participated in atrocities across Europe. They executed prisoners. They massacred civilians. They were not honorable soldiers fighting for a misguided cause. They were war criminals, continuing murder until the final moment. Their defeat at Castle Itter was justice, even if that justice was small-scale and localized. The strangest aspect of the battle was its timing. May 5, 1945. Germany surrendered 3 days later. The war was effectively over. Every participant knew it. Yet the SS attacked anyway. The defenders fought anyway. People died when dying had become pointless. This is the nature of war's final days. Violence continues because violence has momentum. Orders are followed because orders exist. People kill and die even when everyone understands the killing is futile. Stopping requires command. Command had collapsed. Therefore, the violence continued. The alternative would have been surrender. The SS could have withdrawn without attacking. The defenders could have abandoned the castle and let the prisoners take their chances. Both sides could have recognized the war was ending and avoided combat. But that was not possible. The SS were fanatics committed to fighting to the end. The defenders were protecting lives from murder. Compromise was impossible. Combat was inevitable. So the battle occurred and Gangel died, and the SS were defeated and the prisoners were saved. And 3 days later, Germany surrendered and the European war ended, and history recorded one more battle that changed nothing strategically, but meant everything to the people who fought it. The technical aspects of the battle are instructive. Defending a medieval castle with modern weapons created unusual tactical situations. The stone walls provided protection against small arms, but not against the 88mm gun. The open approach meant attackers were exposed, but defenders on the walls were also exposed to sniper fire. The limited number of defenders meant every position had to be held with minimal personnel. There were no reserves. If one position was overrun, the entire defense collapsed. Lee recognized this. His decision to withdraw into the keep was sound tactics. Create successive defensive lines. Trade space for time. Hold until reinforcements arrived. The plan worked because reinforcements arrived. If Baratra had not reached American forces, the keep would have fallen eventually. The defenders would have been killed or captured. The French prisoners would have been executed. The battle would have ended differently. The role of the Sherman tank was critical during the early phase. Besatt and Jenny provided firepower that prevented SS infiltration. When the tank was destroyed, the defense weakened significantly. Armor matters in defensive operations. Even a mobilized tank provides mobile firepower concentration. Without armor, defenders must rely on small arms. Against determined attackers with heavy weapons, small arms are inadequate. The defenders at Castle Itter were fortunate that American reinforcements arrived before the SS could exploit the tank's destruction. The ammunition shortage was near critical. Defenders were rationing by mid-morning. Single shots only. This limited suppressive fire. Attackers could maneuver more freely because defensive fire was sporadic. More ammunition would have extended the defense considerably, but supply was impossible. No resupply convoy could reach the castle through SS-controlled territory. The defenders had what they brought. When it was gone, resistance would end. This is the mathematics of siege warfare. Attackers can be reinforced. Defenders consume finite resources. Eventually, defenders lose unless relieved. Castle Itter was relieved with perhaps 30 minutes of effective ammunition remaining. The margin was thin. The human element made the battle memorable. Former enemies cooperating. Prisoners fighting. A tennis champion running through machine gun fire to summon help. A Wehrmacht major dying to save a French prime minister. An SS defector commanding French VIPs. An American captain coordinating German soldiers. Every element violated normal categorization. Friend, enemy, soldier, prisoner. Nazi, resistance. The categories blurred. People fought together because the alternative was death for everyone. This is the lesson of Castle Itter. War creates rigid categories that circumstances can dissolve immediately. Nazi doctrine said Germans and Slavs and French were different races with incompatible interests. Castle Itter had Austrians and Germans and French and Yugoslavs and Americans fighting together effectively. Military doctrine said soldiers follow chains of command. Gangel and Schrader defied chains of command to protect prisoners. Political theory said politicians were not warriors. Daladier and Reynaud fought competently under fire. Every assumption about how people would behave was violated. People adapted to circumstances. They made choices. Some chose murder, some chose protection. The choices defined them more than their prior categories. The legacy of Castle Itter is modest. One street named, one plaque placed, one book written, one song recorded, not monuments on the National Mall, not taught in every school. The battle was too small, too late, too strange to fit neat narratives about World War II. The war is remembered as Allies versus Axis, good versus evil. Clear sides, clear outcomes. Castle Itter complicates that. Germans fought Germans. Americans trusted former enemies. The categories broke down. That makes people uncomfortable. Better to remember Normandy or Stalingrad, where sides were clear and outcomes were decisive. But history is not clean narratives. History is people making choices under pressure with incomplete information and uncertain consequences. Joseph Gangel chose to protect prisoners when he could have fled or collaborated. That choice cost his life. Jack Lee chose to trust a Wehrmacht officer and defend a castle when he could have withdrawn to safety. That choice succeeded. Jean Barotra chose to run through fire to summon help when he could have stayed in the keep. That choice saved lives. Every person at Castle Itter made choices. Collectively, those choices produced an outcome. 14 French prisoners survived. 1 Wehrmacht major died. 100 SS troops were defeated. The war ended 3 days later and history moved on. But the people who fought at Castle Itter remembered. The French prisoners never forgot. Several returned to Austria multiple times. They placed memorials. They spoke at commemorations. They ensured the story was recorded even if it was not celebrated. They understood that what happened at Castle Itter mattered because it showed choices were possible even in the war's final days. People could choose honor over orders, protection over murder, cooperation over hatred. Those choices were rare, but they were possible. Castle Itter proved it. The strangest battle of World War II was fought by the strangest alliance of World War II defending an obscure castle in Austria against fanatics who refused to accept that the war was lost. The battle lasted 7 hours. 1 person died on the defending side. The castle was saved. The prisoners lived. And the history recorded one more example of courage and cooperation in a war defined by hatred and destruction. That is the story. Small, strange, forgotten, true.